Hello everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach. In this week's episode I'm looking at part 2 of my series on triathlon jargon. Now, I didn't intend it for it to be a two-part series, but last week's episode went on so long, I figured, a subject like this, it can be overwhelming, so let's break it up into two halves. So what I'm going to be doing this week is I'm going to be going from the letter N onwards until the end of the alphabet. I get the feeling this week's episode might actually end up being a bit shorter. Now, before we get started, I wanted to flesh out something that I teased in last week's episode, which is a new service I'm launching, which is called Coach Training Plans. And the reason that I've created these is I want them to be a middle ground between training plans and full coaching. Because if you're looking at, my fully bespoke coaching, £250 a month, that's out of reach financially of most people. I don't think it offers very good value because you get a lot of my time and it is really my chance to help support an athlete with, in the best way that I possibly can. And, people stay on that program for several years, people rave about it, it's clearly a good program that offers value, but it is out of reach for most triathletes. Meanwhile, you've got a training plan, which is, it's a lot cheaper, but it's also inflexible. It is, if you end up losing a week because of illness, it can be difficult to know sort of how best to pick that back up from that. It's not built around you, your schedule, your strengths, your weaknesses. So what I'm doing is, as I've touched on previously, I'm gonna write eventually training plans for all different distances and levels of experience, and people can either choose to have that coaching plan on its own, so they can just sort of pay the sort of £20-30, whatever it is for that training plan or more. Or they can choose to get that training plan coached, which would be significantly more expensive, but still not ridiculous, but starts from around about £15 per week. And the way that works is we set up a call where I get to know you, your background, the equipment that you have, your schedule, and I then look at the first month of this program and I go, okay, based on what you've told me, I'm going to shorten this, I'm going to lengthen that, we're going to have more intervals here. We're going to have a bit more of a focus on this, and it allows you to get that sort of that customized experience, that something really built around you, your chance to ask questions and get an experienced eye to look over things, but without the cost associated of several hours of my time sort of getting to that place. Because rather than me having to write that plan completely from scratch every time, we've already got a foundation, so I can hop on this call with you for sort of this half an hour. And every month we go through and you can update me. I'm always work for this week. I've got a wedding that weekend. I can't do this. I should do this. And I can then hop on there and go, okay, well, let's move that out. Let's shorten this. Let's do this. And I can sort of build this plan around you. As well as this monthly call, we also have a monthly coach session as part of the same call, where I will take you through a subject that we need to cover ahead of your preparation. So it could be that we go through race nutrition, it could be that we go through the course analysis, it could be that we're going through sports science, it could be that we're going through building up a power plan for you to help approach your race. There are a series of coach sessions that I've written up that you will have scheduled on a monthly basis, where I talk you through one of these areas to make sure that you fully understand swimming technique, you fully understand recovery and nutrition, so that you feel empowered to go out there and to really hit the ground running with your training. And as part of these coach training plans, not only do you get all of the coaching and the training plan, you also get all of my educational content about bikes, about swimming technique, about strength training. You get over £350 worth of information, immediate access to it when you sign up. Now, it's going to take me a while to get all of these up and ready for sale on the website. At the moment, I'm focusing on creating the programs for people who are stepping up to their first Ironman from a 70.3, because to be honest, that's one of the bigger markets for coaching. But I am going to, as I've said in previous episodes, write plans up for every distance and every experience level at that distance. So if there is a race you're preparing for that you'd really like some help with, and you want one of these coach training plans to help you get there, drop me an email. Simon@phaisontriathlon.com. It's down in the show notes. And we can kick off this coach training plan experience for you. All right, let's jump into the jargon, shall we? Let's see what phrases I can help you decipher this week. So, First up, starting in the ends, nail. Some days you're the nail, some days you're the hammer. This refers to the fact that, it generally comes from cycling, but broadly speaking, some days you are going to be the hammer, some days you're going to feel really strong, some days you're going to feel like you're absolutely smashing it, some days you're going to feel like you're being smashed. Some days you're the hammer, some days you're the nail. Nail generally refers to you're having a really bad day and you're getting battered by some unforeseen force. It could just be fatigue, it could be just a bad day, bad legs. You hear people talk about that, even at the very highest level of the sport in Tour de France. They talk about, I just woke up with bad legs this morning. Some days it just happens. Negative split. This is where you run faster in the second half of the race than in the first half of the race, and it's something that I think some people put a bit too much focus on, negative splitting, something being faster at the end. We are all going to sort of fatigue, of course, as we get through a race. Now, I'd much rather that somebody does a small negative split and finishes their race feeling really strong, then goes for a heavy positive split. This is really common, especially at 70.3 and Ironman, where somebody go really hard in the bike and in the swim, and then they just fade really badly on the run. So I don't necessarily want people to sort of avoid go for a negative split, but I don't want people to hold themselves back in the first half of the race because they want a negative split. For the satisfaction of doing so, we do need to spread our effort out over the race, and sometimes we just need to go a bit too hard and blow up and find what our limits are the hard way. Neutral shoe. This is a running shoe which it has very little in the way of support in it. Of course, there will be a level of support. But it is for the runner that runs in a relatively simple neutral fashion that doesn't suffer from large levels of overpronation. And you don't need all the additional kind of material and support that comes with some more specialist shoes. NGB stands for National Governing Body. So this could be British Triathlon, USAT, USA Triathlon. Wherever you are in the world, chances are that there will be a body that will be overseeing the sport of triathlon. And that will sort of cover coaching and elite athletics, and they will also have a rule set that will be used in competitions within the country. And these governing bodies, they are, they're far from perfect, but most of them do a reasonably good job at overseeing the sport of triathlon. Moving into the O's, we've got Olympic distance. So Olympic distance is the distance that is raced at the Olympic Games, also known as a standard distance. This is a 1,500 metre swim, followed by a 40 kilometre bike, followed by a 10 kilometre run. Now this is still a real feat of endurance, just because it's, a very sort of middling distance within the world of triathlon. It's also a very honest distance that you can race, relatively hard, but without it being a real sort of day of endurance. It's quite a popular distance for people like myself who are handy over 10k, but over the longer distances, maybe start to fade a little bit. On rails, this is a term that we use to describe when we are riding a bike and it just feels like it's glued to the road. It could be that the surface is really grippy, it could be that the tyres are really good, it could be a combination of both. But people will come back and say, that bike, it just felt like it was on rails. It felt like it was impossible to fall off of it. Overpronation is a term used in running. And it's used to describe when somebody's foot rolls inwards too much. Now, a level of pronation is perfectly natural. Yeah, but if we overpronate, if our foot rolls in too much, this can cause an issue, this can cause injuries, so it's best to try and address this. Now, we can either address it through corrective exercises or through specific shoes that are there to help adjust and sort of reduce the level of pronation. Paddles can either refer to your gear shifters on your bike. People talk about, their paddles, their gear shifters, but more often than not in triathlon, it refers to hand paddles that we use when swimming. So we will have hand paddles that they can come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, but we stick them on our hands, and they can help increase the level of resistance we experience in the water, which can help with our technique, but also sort of isolating the muscles in our upper body a bit more as well and really pushing them. Peaking is when we are at the absolute pinnacle of fitness. Now, this is something that will normally happen a week or two out from our race. When we're training, we spend most of our time in a real sort of state of fatigue. But when we peak, when we back off and we really let ourselves sort of feel good and fresh again, we can get to the point where we're hitting, personal bests over certain distances without even, or at least season's best, without even really trying. We are absolutely flying. And this, again, is something that should happen in our taper towards the end of our training. PB stands for personal best. You also have PR that tends to be used over in the States, personal record. PB, and that you have also have SB, which is season's best, but personal best, it refers to your best performance over a distance, over a time window. So it could be a power PB, it could be it's your best ever power over 20 minutes, or best ever power over 5 seconds, or it could be, if you're running, it could be a 5k PB, the fastest time you've ever run a 5k in. Physio is short for physiotherapist, and this is an individual, also known as a physical therapist in some parts of the world, whose job it is to help athletes, or anyone really, who is suffering with pain. Now, as a strength and conditioning coach, I can look at somebody, I can do a sort of an assessment of them, and I can go, oh, it looks like this is tight, it looks like this is weak, let's try and address this. But as soon as somebody comes to me and goes, oh, my knee is hurting, have you got any idea why? I need to refer to a physiotherapist. If that person is in pain, it is beyond my scope of practice to be able to help them. A physio needs to diagnose the issue, we need to find out what the issue is, and they could then pass them back to me as a strength and conditioning coach for some rehab work. But we do need to diagnose this from that physio. We need to assess where it is that issue is occurring from. So physiotherapists, they are expensive to go and visit because they are very highly qualified and experienced people, but they are essential for triathletes. In fact, I actually recommend, where athletes can, if you can put yourself in with a physiotherapist once a year just to give you a once over, it can help you prevent repeated visits and even injuries in the year. Just by having someone who really understands the body and how it all works, give you a quick MOT and be able to give you an idea of, right, okay, here are some exercises that I recommend that you use. Because when you go to a physio, they will identify the problem, hopefully, and be able to give you some exercises to correct that. And if you go away and you complete those exercises, that should help you rehabilitate this injury. But I cannot stress enough how important it is that you actually do the exercises that they give you. Peloton is French for small ball, and this refers to a group of cyclists who are all riding together in the draft zone as a big bunch, and it is the main group within a bike race. So if you hear somebody talk about being in the peloton, that is that they are, within the main body of a cycling race. A plateau is a dreaded state of training for triathletes, and it's where we get to a point where we're no longer improving. We all make rapid improvements when we start off our triathlon training. We're starting to run faster, we're starting to run longer, our swimming technique is improving. Then we get to a point, it normally happens after sort of 18 months, 2 years, something like that, where what we're doing no longer works, so we've stopped getting any faster. And this is where having some inside sort of help, some feedback from an exterior individual such as myself, it can help people get off of that plateau and help them continue to improve. Power refers to one or two things. In the general sense, the ability of us to develop power athletically, it is developing the ability to move forcefully and with speed. So it could be that we get somebody to do box jumps or med ball slams, or we start to do sort of sprints with paddles in the pool. Something that is really going to develop our power, our ability to generate force quickly. Now, this is still sort of general athleticism. It's useful for triathletes to have, but it's not something we generally obsess over. But when most triathletes talk about power, they're talking about cycling power. So this is the very objective measurement of how hard it is that you're cycling. It's a measurement of torque, which is how hard you're pushing the pedals around, combined with your cadence, how fast you're pedaling. So if you are pedaling really fast and putting down a lot of power, you'll have a very high power, as opposed to somebody who's pedaling very slowly and who is putting down very little in the way of torque, who have a very low power. Protein is one of the 3 macronutrients that the body needs. It can be found, broadly speaking, animal products is the main area you find it, but there are plenty of plant-based alternatives. You just tend to find it in lower concentration in plants, so you do need to sort of be mindful and choose where it is that you're getting your protein from if you are with a plant-based diet. But it is essential for recovery, it's essential for muscles, it's essential for every aspect of the human body, basically. And a lot of triathletes don't get enough protein. PSI stands for pressure per square inch, and this is a measurement of normally how much air you have in your tyre. So if somebody talks about, oh, I'm running my tyres at 80 PSI, that means it's just an indication of how much air is in their tyre and how hard their tyre is as a result. Pull has three definitions. So in the world of cycling, where you tend to take turns, somebody doing a pull would be when they would ride on the front, normally, relatively hard, and they say, oh, they put in a big pull. They really dragged us along, trying to help us catch up to the group in front or to try and help us push out our advantage. Alternatively, in the pull, it can refer to one of two things. Either it can refer to when you are swimming a distance using a pull buoy. So it could be, if it's 200 meters pull, that would be swimming 200 meters with a pull buoy. Alternatively, it can refer to the pull phase of the stroke, and that is generally what happens the majority of the time that your arm is underwater. So once your arm is in position with the catch, it's that big push backwards. It's known as the pull. The pull buoy, as I touched on previously, this is a float. It looks a little bit like a figure of eight, most of them, when you look at them. The idea is that this sits in your sort of between your legs, really sort of right up, close to your body, and this helps lift your legs into the up in the water. So if you are a swimmer who has an issue with sinky legs, then a pull buoy will lift you into a much more efficient position. And a lot of people find themselves really, sort of swimming with the pull buoy nearly all the time because they're so much faster with it. But honestly, you need to learn to kick your legs properly, because if you find yourself at a race where wetsuits are banned, then it is critical that you are able to sort of kick your legs and to swim normally. For Q, I have quick link, and these are pieces of metal that come in pairs that make up a sort of a link in a bicycle chain, and you carry these around in your cycling bag, and the idea, well, sort of saddle bag, I should say, and if you're unfortunate enough to have a snap chain when you're out riding, you can use your quick link to be able to repair the chain. Now these quick links, they're not especially sort of quick or easy to use, so I do recommend that you get some experience working with these before you find yourself wrestling with them at the side of the road in the cold. But the fact that you are carrying them with you is the most important thing, because if somebody else finds you and you go, oh, my chain snapped, and they go, have you got some quick links? Yes, I have them in my bag. They can help you get back on the road. Race week. This is the week of a main race. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call the sort of, if you have a B race or a C race, I wouldn't necessarily designate that as being race week, but this is the sort of period of your training where the training is going to be quite light. You probably won't do any intensity above race pace, and you are winding down. You're getting yourself in the headspace. You're getting yourself ready for the big day, for the big race. It's race week. Rails refers to the rails on the saddle. So if you look at a bicycle saddle, it will be on rails, and there will be a sort of a bolt on the bottom of the saddle which you can loosen. That allows you to move the saddle backwards and forwards. This is a fantastic way of sort of being able to adjust the saddle really easily, so that when people talk about rails, unless they're talking about being on rails, which you've already covered, if you talk about the rails of a bike, they're normally talking about the rails at the bottom of the saddle. The rear mech is the piece of metal that is next to your cassette, well, underneath it, I should say, and every time you click your shift, it is going to move a little bit inside or outside, and this moves the chain up along the cog. This is a little bit of a finicky piece of equipment. It does take some time to get it set up, so you get some seamless shifting, so it's a good idea that you familiarise yourself with it. Recovery, it can refer to a number of things. So when we're swimming, it can refer to a rest interval. So we could say, oh, we are going to be swimming sort of 400 meter intervals with 30 seconds recovery. 30 seconds, you'll be at the end of the pool waiting to go again. Cycling, when we're talking about, while I'm on swimming actually, it can also be the phase of your stroke between when your arm comes out of the water and re-enters the water. When we're cycling, the recovery will generally be a period spent at a lower intensity. So we will be, we do sort of say 5 minutes of FTP with 3 minutes of recovery. That recovery will probably be in zone 1, easy spinning. We're not stationary like we would be in the pool. We are just, pedaling our legs very slowly, very lightly, getting ourselves ready for that next interval. Running, when we have recovery, that is generally going to be sort of jogging at a very slow pace. It could be walking in some cases if you're doing incredibly hard intervals. Generally, standing around isn't really recommended. Maybe if you're doing, sort of 100-meter sprints or something, then you may not be capable of jogging down because you need to get ready to go again. But yeah, broadly speaking, within a session, that's what recovery will mean. But recovery also covers the ability of your body to adapt to exercise. So it's the kind of the 23 hours of the day in which you're not training. It's your sleep, it's your nutrition, it's resting up. All of this comes under the umbrella of recovery, and you cannot afford to neglect recovery. You cannot afford to be a little bit fast and loose with it. Oh, it'll be fine. I'll stay up later and just get 5 hours sleep, and I'll just get some fast food on the way home. It doesn't really matter, because that is going to have a massive impact on your ability to actually get fitter and faster. Next up, we have rim. This is the largest part of a wheel. It's the large circular component. No tyre, no spokes, it's just the rim around the outside. And if you are looking at buying new wheels or getting new wheels built up, you'll need to be selecting the rims. These also act as the braking surface for rim brakes. Next up, we have rivet. Now, a lot of cyclists will talk about being on the rivet. And if they talk about being on the rivet, they are pushing just about as hard as they can. They are really turning themselves inside out. But where does this term come from, rivet? Well, when cycling saddles were made in, years gone by, there used to be a rivet towards the front of the saddle, which would sort of be holding everything in place, and the idea would be that you were sat on the edge of the saddle, really in an aerodynamic, aggressive position, as far forward and low down as you could be. And the term is now just used for general levels of exertion when we're talking about something being on the rivet. Rollers can refer to a series of different things. So it can be a series of not especially steep hills. So you could be talking about somebody coming, a group of cyclists coming over the rollers. It's not really a proper climb as such, but it's not flat. It's more a sort of a short series of undulating hills. Or it could be an indoor training device. Now, if you watch track cycling competitions, you'll see people riding on rollers. You may have even seen them on YouTube. They are a sort of an old-fashioned training device where it's sort of 3 cylinders that are sat in a metal frame. And the idea is that you balance yourself on these rollers, you ride along, and it doesn't provide you much in the way of resistance, but it does allow you to be able to ride indoors, helps develop your handling skills, and it's a popular way for people to warm up. Rotation can refer to one of two things. Either it can refer to a group of cyclists who are sort of rotating off the front, taking their turns, swinging off, coming back. This is when sort of they form a chain gang. Or rotation, more often than not, when in the context of triathlon rather than cycling, it will refer to the sort of the gentle body roll from side to side as somebody is swimming along with their freestyle stroke. A rotor makes up part of the disc brake, and this is a large metal disc, and it's what the calipers bite into. It's what slows you down. The larger the calipers are, the better they are at dispersing heat, and you can also have calipers that are, of a slightly different higher quality or for different purposes. But making sure that you have the right rotors for the braking system that you have is important. RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion, and this is a measure on a scale of from 1 to 10 is the one that I and most coaches like to use. And it's, where 0 would be you're doing nothing, 1 is an incredibly light effort, whereas a 10 would be absolutely maximum, as hard as you could possibly go. And the idea is that these can be used for a prescription, normally within swimming. So we could say, okay, right, I'd like you to warm up with 250 meters at RP of 3, please. Meanwhile, it could be that you are giving me some feedback on how that felt. I could say, oh, well, how was that? And you go, oh, well, that was really tough, that session. I give it sort of an 8 out of 10. The run out will be marked quite clearly in a transition area, hopefully, and that will indicate where it is that you need to start running. So after you have finished transition 2, you'll be looking for the sign saying run out. You need to head into that direction to start the run course. A running vest is a very useful piece of equipment, often associated with trail running and, really long distance, but, not always. And it is it's a vest that you wear. You will have the ability to carry water, which is really helpful, as well as some zip up pockets for you to put items such as keys, energy bars, gels, all of that. And there'll also be a big storage compartment at the back, which is normally used for people to keep sort of something like a waterproof or an extra layer for warmth if you're going to be going out for a long run where it's either there is a good chance of rain or it is going to get notably cooler throughout your run, and you're going to need another layer at some point. You can carry it around in the back of that. Hitting the S's, we've got saddle. Now most people know what a bicycle saddle is. It's where your bum sits. A scissor kick is an unwanted part of our freestyle stroke. This is when somebody is kicking along, and instead of their legs kicking in a nice sort of 11 shape, as it were, really like straight, two legs next to each other with the ankles brushing each other as they swim along, it is when somebody's legs kick out really wide as they are swimming. And if you have a look, if you sit there and watch people swim, I reckon that a good 2/3 of people swimming freestyle in a pool at any given time will have a scissor kick. The seat post is what connects the saddle to the bike. Now the seat post, it will drop into the frame itself, and there will be a sort of a bolt that tightens it. It's incredibly important because most seat posts are made out of carbon. Even on aluminium bikes, you'll quite often have seat posts that are carbon fibre, or people that upgrade to carbon fibre seat posts. It's incredibly important you use a torque wrench or get a mechanic to do this up, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be tightening up your nice carbon fibre seat post and hear a big crack and know that you have just managed to crush your brand new seat post within the frame. So make sure that if you're installing a carbon fibre seat post that you use a torque wrench. A seat stay is a piece of sort of the frame that runs from broadly sort of halfway down the sort of the seat tube, which you get onto in a minute. Actually, I cover seat tube now. It runs it's the long bit of the frame, the tube that runs from the saddle all the way down to the bottom bracket, sort of where your cranks are. And the seat stay, it will normally around about like halfway down the seat tube, it will come and it will branch off to the side towards the back of the bike, and it forms part of that rear triangle that heads towards your rear wheel. That bit of the frame there is called the seat stay. It doesn't tend to come up much, but it's worth knowing. To shift is the action of changing gear. Now this could be quite confusing in cycling because if we are driving and we say we're going to shift up a gear, this would be from first to second or second to third, and the more that we shift up a gear, the faster we're going. Whereas in cycling, if somebody were to say to shift up, that could mean that they want to shift up the cassette, which means they want to go into a larger cog, which actually makes it easier. So I will generally say shift into an easier gear or shift into a harder gear to avoid all that confusion. We then have shifters, and these are our gear shifters. These are what help us shift between gears on the front and the rear derailleur. But for the vast majority of road cyclists, your brakes will be included in the shifters as well, as part of sort of within the levers. So when we talk about shifters, we are talking about the brakes and the shifters in one unit. Shocks refers to suspension. So if we could say, that bike, it's got some rear shocks or the front shocks, we are talking about suspension. Short course can refer to either the sprint in the Olympic distance and super sprint, I suppose, or it can refer to a 25 metre pool. So if people talk about swimming short course meters, and they'll be talking about the times that they swim within a 25 metre pool. Single up is a instruction that will come from sort of generally towards the back of the group if they realise that there is a car that is stuck behind the group, or any other reason for us sort of wanting to ride into a single file. Single up would be called, and people should then sort of filter from riding two abreast into cycling sort of nose to tail to each other. Now, if you are on certain roads, it can actually be safer for cyclists to ride two abreast, and because car drivers don't have to, they spend less time making the pass because there's only half as many cyclists to get past. So just as soon as there's a car behind you, you don't need to immediately go single up to let the car pass. Sometimes it is safer to stay two abreast. A skewer is what runs through your wheel if you're using a quick release system. You'll know you're using a quick release system because there will be a sort of a nut that you tighten on one end of the wheel, and the other will have a lever that you pull and that you open. Whereas a through axle is the alternative, and that is something that you literally sort of twist the through axle into the rear wheel, into the wheel itself. Older bikes generally would tend to use quick release, and they have these skewers, whereas a lot of newer bikes tend to have through axles. But yes, the skewer refers to that piece of metal that runs through the wheel and sort of keeps everything together. If you are doing indoor riding, if you're doing turbo training, you will need to use an indoor specific skewer rather than the lightweight one you'll be using out on the road, because the lightweight ones, they run the risk of damage if you're riding them indoors because of the strain that's put through them. Skins refers to swimming in not a wetsuit, basically. So if somebody says, oh, I'm going out, I'm doing a lake swim, I'm doing a sea swim in skins, they're talking about they're just going out there in their swimming costume, no neoprene. Slam or slammed generally refers to, they're talking about somebody's stem. Now the stem is the bit that connects your handlebars to the rest of the bike, and there will be a number of spaces that are probably below your stem, and a lot of people think it is the best way to ride, to slam that stem, to have that stem as low as possible, because that would get you in a really aggressive position and make you ride as fast as possible. Now, unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that immediately being faster. A lot of people don't have the flexibility or the mobility to be in a position that low. But yeah, when people talk about slamming stems, they're talking about having their stem as low as possible to get you as low as possible to get you into a fast, aggressive riding position. Slippery is used as a compliment to refer to how aerodynamic a frame is, or a setup is. If people go, oh, that helmet and that bike combo, they look really slippery, and they look really fast. They're going to cut through the air really easy. Slow is an instruction that will be called out when a group is approaching normally a junction. Or it could be any other reason that the group might need to slow down. It could be that somebody's stopping to pull over for something. When you hear slow, you repeat that claim and you start braking. You sort of prepare yourself with the fact that riders in front of you are going to be slowing down and probably stopping. If you are actually stopping, then you would call out stopping instead of slowing, broadly speaking. To smash generally is to sort of work really hard. So somebody could say, oh, he's really smashing it up that last climb, or they absolutely smashed that ride. They put in a huge effort and they did really well. Meanwhile, Smash Fest refers to a ride that is relentlessly difficult. And this is generally when the egos start flying around. Oh yeah, let's do an easy ride, let's keep it chill. And then we get to a hill and somebody launches off the front and somebody goes after them and everybody's suddenly at the saddle and pushing along, get to the top and they keep the heat on. And it turns into a mini race. That is, generally speaking, the description of a Smash Fest. Spacers I referenced in my bit talking about the stem. Now the spacers on your stem, again, these are metal or carbon fibre sort of discs, which help, you can swap them in and out, change the order of them, how many are above the stem, how many are below, and they help you control the height of the stem. And you can get different height ones to allow you to really sort of get that down to the millimeters that you want. But you can also get spacers on your wheels. Generally your rear wheel is where you'd have them. If you have a cassette that is a little bit too small, and even if it was just out by a couple of millimeters, just a little bit small for that rear wheel, then that cassette is going to shift around and it's not going to shift well at all. It's going to be absolutely a nightmare. So you will have a sort of a spacer, maybe just like 1/2 mil spacer, 1.5 mil spacer between the hub of the wheel and the cassette where all the gears are. And that will help ensure that you can index your gears properly and they can be shifting nicely. And I realise I forgot the third use of a spacer. This is within the cassette itself, because you have all of the gears on the cassette, but there will have a small plastic disc of a predetermined width, and there will be between each gear. And the idea is that by having those plastic spaces there, it ensures that the distance between each gear is predetermined, and that the rear derailleur will shift by that amount to help you have nice clean gear shifts. To spin is it's a term that has three meanings within cycling. The first one is to head out for a very sort of a short, relatively easy ride. I'm just popping out for a spin for half an hour. It's not a big structured training ride. They're just sort of turning the legs over. And the other definition of it is if you are riding with a high cadence and very little force. So if you have just finished a really hard interval, you would say, "Oh, just spin the legs out." So you're really in zone one, really easy, just sort of pedaling at a higher cadence, trying to clear some of that lactic acid or whatever makes you feel better between intervals. Or it can be that somebody is simply riding with a high cadence at a higher intensity. So it could be they're spinning away up that climb. They're riding a high cadence away from the group, being really efficient. It can mean lots of different things. And even in swimming, if somebody talks about them spinning their arms, it can mean that somebody's arms are turning over at too high a rate and the timing of their stroke has been thrown off as a result. So yeah, lots of uses of the word spin. Splits refers to the time it took you to complete an effort. So if we are looking at the entirety of a race, we could say, your bike split took you 3 hours. Alternatively, if you're doing a training run, then you may have it set up, as most people do on their watch, to give you a new split every kilometre. So you can have a look through your splits and see how fast it took you to run each kilometre. So it's a way of breaking up an effort into bite-sized chunks for analysis. A spill is a crash where, a rider wasn't seriously hurt. So you can say, had a bit of a spill on a roundabout. They fell off the bike, they skidded for a bit, they lost some skin, but there's no serious injuries. They got straight back up and jumped on their bike. Spokes are what comprise of the sort of the majority of the wheel, really, the structure and integrity of it. And they are the sort of the thin pieces of metal that run from the hub of the bicycle to the rim. It's what gives the bike its rigidity. If you have a sort of a broken spoke, if a spoke splits, then that will send the wheel off true. And you also need to make sure that the spokes are sufficiently tightened to make sure that the wheel is going to be as true as possible. But don't try and get overexcited and get there with a spoke key and start tightening up all your spokes, because you're not looking for them to be as tight as possible. You're just looking for them all to be as uniformly tight to make sure that they are all exerting the same level of pressure on the rim. Truing a wheel is really difficult. It is one of those jobs that I would ask a bike shop to do. A sprint, I think we all know this one. It's an incredibly short maximal effort. So in triathlon terms, it would normally be if somebody is doing sort of sprint training where they'll be swimming 25s as hard as they can in a pool, or they'll be absolutely gunning for it as much as they can over sort of 15 seconds on the bike. Don't tend to include them an enormous amount in our training. We also have sprint distance, which is a triathlon which is made up of a 400 metre pool swim or a 750 metre open water swim, then roughly a 20k bike and a 5k run. A stability shoe is a relatively rare kind of running shoe, and it's a shoe which is really sort of built in a way to really sort of cradle a runner's foot, and it is used to help address issues that really are quite serious with sort of overpronation or oversupination, or that there is some kind of other issue with it with an athlete's foot. These are not shoes that I recommend that people really head in the direction of unless a physio has directed you to. The term stride comes from running, and it can be used to describe one of two things. It can either be used to describe the sort of taking sort of a step in running, as it were, from your foot leaving the ground behind you to swinging out in front of you and landing on the floor in front of you. It could be called a stride, and people talk about measuring their stride length, their stride rate. Alternatively, a stride can be a kind of interval where a runner will do a sort of a relatively fast, but not super fast, just a relatively fast interval, sort of unstructured really. They're just sort of breaking into sort of a fast run for about 5-10 seconds before easing back down towards a normal speed, and these will often be included in the warm-up or the cool down of a workout. Super sprint refers to a very beginner-friendly, short event, often held in a pool. They're not always. You're looking at about a 400 metre swim, 12km bike and a 2.5k run. A great way to get involved in triathlon. A support shoe is a kind of running shoe not to be confused with the stability shoe. So stability shoes really are quite a sort of clunky, almost sort of medical, I guess you could you could say term for people who need a lot of stability, whereas a support shoe is simply a shoe that is designed to help a runner correct an overpronation or oversupination. So it is when, a member of staff at the running store have a look at your stride and go, yeah, you got a little bit of overpronation there, so I recommend you look at these support shoes. Issues with overpronating can be fixed with strength and conditioning, but a support shoe is a good way to help ensure that you reduce the risk of injury in the short term. I'd say a lot of people who are starting running, go into running shop, I reckon about 70-80% of them will end up in a support shoe, because the number of people who have a truly neutral gait when they're just starting running later in life are very few. Sweet spot is an intensity that is just under threshold. So if we're riding at, normally used for cycling, if we're riding at FTP, that's really quite hard. That really is going to cause quite a bit of fatigue, but also give you a nice fitness boost. If we ride in sweet spot, which is just below, up to around about 93% of threshold, give or take, obviously, around that window, then we're going to get the majority of the benefits of riding at threshold, but without the same fatigue that's associated with it. So it's a very popular intensity for training at. Moving on to the T's, we have T1 and T2. T1 stands for transition 1, and it's where you change from the swim to the bike. Transition 2 is where you change from the bike to the run. And these are just terms that you'll see appear on your results when they're giving you your splits of how long it took you in each discipline. To take a turn is to spend some time cycling on the front of the group. So if you're riding with others and somebody asks you to take a turn, that means it's your turn to sit on the front of the group and to sort of drag each other along. Something I will say is that if you do really feel that you're being pressured into doing this when you're already absolutely exhausted, don't feel that you have to. A tank slapper is when you lose grip with your rear wheel, either because you lock the brakes up or it hits something and you sort of lose traction with it, and you have a little bit of a slide with your bike, but you manage to catch it. So somebody could say, I really got a bit of a tank slapper on at that roundabout there. It means that they came very close to crashing because they lost grip in their rear wheel, but ultimately they stayed upright, hopefully. The taper is a period of your training. Normally, it'd be the week before your race, maybe 2 weeks in the case of an Ironman, and it's where we back off on our training. So we maintain the same sort of intensity because we don't want to find ourselves stale. But our longer sessions will get a lot shorter. We may only do one session a week. We're really backing off the volume to allow our body to recover and make sure that we're really fresh come race day. The team pursuit is an event that is held on the track. And this is an event where you have a team of 4 cyclists, and they start at opposite ends of the track, and they work as a team, taking turns, and they're trying to catch the other team up. It's very rare that one team will catch another during the team pursuit. They're just trying to make sure that they are getting as close to them as possible, and the team that ends up closer to one than the other will win. Tempo is a training zone, generally around zone 3, and it's a sort of comfortably hard effort. You definitely feel that you're working, and there'll be a part of you that goes, if I had the choice, I'd probably back off roundabout now, especially after you've been in that zone for around about sort of 30-40 minutes. It's good for building muscular endurance, and this is the kind of intensity that a lot of people, if you gave them a bike and said, great, go out and ride this bike to get fit and to lose weight, most people would ride in that zone. It's not easy enough to really develop the aerobic fitness, but it's not really hard enough to get any sort of really sort of massive fitness gains either. It's the kind of intensity that a lot of people race an Ironman 70.3 at, fitter people I should say. Threshold is a tricky term. It's generally used to describe somebody's around FTP, so that's the kind of power they can hold for between sort of around 30 and 70 minutes, broadly speaking. It's the highest power that somebody can hold in a quasi-steady state without fatigue, should you care to know. It's not somebody's 60-minute power. But you are looking at a power that is really quite uncomfortable to hold, and that you'll feel absolutely exhausted at the end of holding for around about sort of anything more than about 40 minutes. You will be on your limit at that point. You will hear people talk about LT1 and LT2, lactate threshold 1, lactate threshold 2. I will explain them here. Lactate threshold 1 is when you start to develop lactic acid. So when your effort is no longer purely easy and the body can afford to simply rely on oxygen. It's when it really starts having to work creating lactic acid, which means that you're working on borrowed time a little bit. You can't hold that effort for much longer. And LT1 normally occurs sort of towards the top end of zone 2, low end of zone 3. LT2 is when we switch from being aerobic to anaerobic, and this is generally above slightly above FTP. How when you'll be running a 5k or doing a time trial or a really hard effort, you'll be pushing on your limit and you'll try to go a little bit faster, but as you pick it up just by that little bit extra, then all the alarms start going off in your head and you go, I can't maintain this is too hard. That's LT2. Through axle we touched on earlier, but it's a more modern equivalent to the quick release skewer. It is a little sort of hard, sort of slower to make a wheel change with a through axle, but most bikes have moved in favour. It's a more reliable system. It is broadly a better system, I have to say. It can just take, it'd be a bit of an issue to get the thread lined up sometimes, and you do have to spin it in, but I do think that broadly speaking it's safer because you don't run the risk of riding along with a loose rear wheel in the same way that you do with a quick release. I have had it a couple of times when I've got back from a ride with a quick release bike and I lift my bike up to sort of roll it into the house and the rear wheel pops out because I hit a pothole, the skewer came open, and I was very close to having a serious crash if I had gone around a corner in the wrong way or hit another pothole. A timing chip is a small plastic device with a chip inside of it that goes around your ankle. I recommend you put it on your left ankle or the non-drive side sort of leg of your bike, so it doesn't run the risk of getting caught up in the chain. This will beep when you go over timing mats and be able to give you your splits. A timing mat will be laid out across the course. Normally it has rubber over it, and as you go over these timing mats you will hear sort of a small beeping sound, and they will send a signal through to sort of a computer that will be nearby, and that will help register your race number, which is associated with your timing chip. And it will be able to tell you, when you look back, how fast it is you completed each discipline in. A top tube is one of the major sort of parts of the bike, and that runs along the top of your bike. So it will be the tube that your knees come sort of close to brushing against as you're riding. Some traditional ladies' bikes will not have this tube here. Some people might know it as a crossbar. Tops are the sort of the horizontal part of your handlebar, dropped handlebars, where you don't have any access to the brakes. You'd be holding the bike, in the way that you would ride a flat bar bike. People only really sit here when they are going incredibly slowly and they are sort of stretching their back out, or if they're riding up a climb and they have no need to access their brakes or their gears and they're just grinding away in a different position. Torque is a term from physics, and it refers to force being applied in a rotational plane. So as you are cycling, you're spinning your legs in a circle, and that generates torque. Torque is how we measure the amount of force that you're using. A torque wrench is an essential piece of kit for anyone who's doing significant bike maintenance at home. You set it to a certain Newton meter, so you can say this, if you look at a part that you're installing, it goes max 5 Newton meters. You can set your torque wrench to say like 4.5. And as you're tightening up the bolt, there'll come a point where the torque wrench it doesn't want to go any tighter, and at that point it depends on the torque wrench that you have. It may make a noise. The one that I have, it just sort of stops turning, and it sort of makes a little bit of a sort of a bend, like you're breaking the neck of the wrench. And basically that's it, letting them know, look, you have hit the upper end of your torque target, and this helps you prevent components being too loose and falling off while you're riding, or having them too tight and damaging the components. So really essential piece of kit if you want to be looking after your bike. The track is a colloquial term for a velodrome, and it often, between around about that sort of 200, 350, there's different standards, but it's a track where someone will ride around indoors on this oval shape. You'll have steep bankings. When you look at watching the Olympics and they have cycling, Most of the events are held on this velodrome, and people ride fixed gear bikes with no brakes, really high speed. It's a very kind of high adrenaline way of racing bikes, and I encourage triathletes to have a bash if they have the chance at a track taster session, because it will make you a better cyclist. A track bike is a bike that is designed for use on a track, and this is very appealing to a lot of cyclists because they'll be browsing bikes and they'll find a bike that looks really cheap and go, oh, that looks brilliant, that's a great price, that one is. Chances are it will be a track bike. It has a fixed gear, so it has no brakes, and it only has one gear as well. These are totally unsuitable for riding outside on the road, in my opinion. Some people will, but I don't think there's a place for that. I think it's too dangerous. You will be using them if you ride on a track, because that's the way that it is. Some tracks have sessions where you can take road bikes on, but broadly speaking, you'll be using a track bike on a track. And again, it will make you a better cyclist if you get used to using them. A track pump is a pump that you will use. It's a big freestanding one that will come up to most people's kind of like halfway up their leg. It's a proper sized bike pump, and you'll be sort of able to use both your hands to pump up your tyres. This is an essential. I remember when I first started cycling, I only had a tiny bedroom, and I thought, oh, I don't have space for a track pump, I'll just use a hand pump. Terrible mistake. You will need a track pump to get your tyres over much above kind of 40 psi. A trainer, people talk about riding the trainer, they're generally referring to a turbo trainer. And this is a large piece of machinery that you'll have indoors. You'll attach your bike onto this trainer. And now most modern trainers, there'll be a cassette attached to the bike, to the trainer, sorry. So you take your rear wheel off and you put the bike with the front wheel on the turbo trainer, and that allows you to ride your bike indoors. It will measure power, which is incredibly useful, and it will also change your resistance based on different courses that you ride. So if you are riding up a mountain, for instance, it will really increase the resistance, which makes it a lot harder to pedal, and you have to use your gears to, it really helps simulate real world riding. A lot better than sort of previous older models. And if you are a triathlete, if you are looking to train intervals, which can be very difficult to do on the road, especially in cities, or you're going to need to be riding on days when the weather is really horrific and it's just not safe for riding, then turbo trainer is absolutely the way to go. A tri is quite simply short for triathlon. Tri bars is another term for aero bars, which I covered in the first episode. A tri-suit is a one-piece racing suit, normally in lycra, which will these days most likely have the legs will go down to sort of halfway down your thighs. And you have sleeves that come halfway down your arm. It will also have a chamois pad that makes cycling more comfortable, but it's not too large so as to really impact the running. It is what you will wear for the entirety of the race, so you'll put it under your wetsuit and put your wetsuit on over the top of it. And you'll then remove the wetsuit and get on the bike, and it will dry out really quickly, and it will then be there with you for the bike and the run. The toe box is the space right at the end of the shoe where your toes go. And you hear people talking about having a narrow toe box or very wide toe box, and then that simply refers to the shape of the shoe at the end, and that can help dictate which shoes it is that will fit you. Because with shoes, you really do need to make sure that you are choosing a shoe that is going to suit your sort of the shape of your feet, basically. A touch turn is a term that we use to describe a turn that you make when swimming, where you don't do any somersault in the water. You just touch the wall, push off, and go again. A good touch turn is faster than a poor flip turn or tumble turn, but yeah, you really, if you want to be swimming smoothly, you want to get used to sort of swimming in open water where you don't have that little micro break at the end, then tumble turns are the way to go. A tow is a phrase used to describe, you could give somebody a tow if they are sat in your slipstream behind you on the bike. So you could say, oh, I was towing him round the whole race and then just ran past me on the run. Or it could be you talking about, oh, somebody helped give me a tow. We worked together so that we could sort of get through that training ride together. A trail is a term that's generally used to describe an off-road section that you'll be running or cycling on. So it could be trail running or mountain biking. These will generally happen on trails. Trails can vary enormously from, sort of very hard-packed sort of gravel through to, some really sort of muddy, sort of gnarly different areas. So it's always worth sort of doing a bit of research if you are thinking of heading out on the trails, which I recommend you do, to make sure that you end up taking the right kind of bike or the right kind of shoes with you. The term true refers to wheels, and if wheel is described as being true, it will be completely sort of balanced and completely straight. If a wheel is out of true, it will be bent or it will be warped in a slight way, and you may hear it sort of catching the rim brakes if you've got a rim brake bike as it goes along, creating resistance. A TT is a cycling competition, generally either 10 miles or 40 kilometres, one of those two. And this will be a test of a rider against the clock, riding on their own without anyone to draft, or at least it being illegal to draft someone, because people normally set off in intervals of 30 seconds or a minute, and if you do catch the rider in front, you're not allowed to sit behind them, because that is cheating. You have to overtake them. And it is a simple case of how fast can you travel this distance. We also have TT bikes, which are bikes which are UCI legal, and that's the important part. They are bikes that have they conform to the standards of the UCI, which is the global governing body for cycling, and they look, like a relatively normal bike, apart from having the tri-bars at the front and the slightly different geometry, whereas a triathlon bike is slightly different because it will not conform to UCI standards. It will not have to have that triangle shape, and it can't, it can be no longer than this and no higher than this, where the designers just get to have a load of fun and go, we're going to make a bike that's as fast as we can make it. A lot of them don't have seat tubes, they'll have storage compartments and all these little, tricks that they'll put on the bike. So a TT bike is UCI compliant, a triathlon bike is not. It's all about speed. Some triathletes prefer riding pure tri bikes, some prefer riding a time trial bike. Because they can end up actually being lighter sometimes. It's, it really is down to sort of a matter of choice or your budget. It's also worth actually looking at the geometry of certain TT bikes, because they can be incredibly aggressive and only designed to be ridden for short distances, over about 40 kilometers. And if you want to be riding 180 kilometers, then you may need to go for a bike that has a more relaxed geometry. Again, we're getting to the weeds a little bit here, but I just wanted to make clear the distinction between a TT bike, which is UCI legal, and a triathlon bike, which is not. Tubes is a colloquial term for inner tubes. So if somebody says, "Oh, I bought a couple of spare tubes with me," they're referring to inner tubes. Tubeless is a system which replaces an inner tube, where instead there is a vacuum created within the tyre, which helps sort of pin it to the rim, and there is sealant inside that tyre, so that if there is a small breach in the tyre, then that sealant will rush through and hopefully clog that hole, which will allow you to continue your ride without needing to change inner tubes. Some people swear by tubeless, some people hate it and avoid it like the plague. I don't have strong opinions on it. I think it's broadly speaking an upgrade, as long as you maintain it and look after it correctly and replace the sealant. So it is a bit more of a faff than inner tubes, but you're also much less likely to end up with a puncture and having to be sort of wrangling with your wheel on the side of the road. So swings and roundabouts. A tubular tyre, otherwise known as tubs. These are tyres which are glued onto the rim. Now, if you see a really cheap triathlon bike or TT bike on the market, chances are it uses tubular wheels, and they're about £70 a tyre, and you have to glue them onto your wheel, which is stressful, because if you get that wrong, then things are going to go badly very quickly. And if you puncture, you'd have to have a spare tube with you, then need to glue on. Look, avoid tubular wheels like the plague. It's okay if you are sort of riding the Tour de France and you have a car behind you with mechanics and a spare bike to throw at you if you end up in an issue. But these days, the difference between tubulars and clinchers, it's very small, and I actually think the majority of professional cyclists now actually ride tubeless rather than tubular. So yes, tubular, avoid it. Twitchy refers to a bike where it will respond to any slight change to steering or any stimulus sort of very quickly. This is normally bikes that are set up to be really aggressive, and if you are not careful, you can end up in a little bit of trouble with these because they can be very sort of responsive to any changes in direction. So yeah, do be careful when you are setting up your bike and your aero bars and your stem and all that you don't end up with a bike that is too twitchy and a bit of a handful to handle. Two abreast refers to when you are riding alongside another rider. In the vast majority of countries, it is legal for cyclists to ride two abreast, one next to each other. Not always, and there are situations where you're expected to single up and ride in single file. But if you hear people talking about riding two abreast, that is where you are riding shoulder to shoulder with somebody else on the road. The UCI is the Union Cycliste Internationale. How's my French impression? I apologise if I butchered that to any listeners who may be in France. But it felt wrong to just read it in English. It is the governing body for cycling, so they are based in Switzerland, and they oversee Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, the World Tour, any sort of big bike races, even the Olympics, any kind of cycling event, BMX, mountain biking, anything regarding bikes outside of triathlon really, is all overseen by them. And they tend to enforce rules such as, maximum sock height and the minimum bar width, and all of these rules to help maintain something of a level playing field. A lot of the rules they have, such they have a minimum weight for bikes. A lot of these rules are a bit archaic, and they were introduced for the right reasons, such as they wanted to make a minimum bike weight to stop bike manufacturers from building bikes that were too lightweight and too brittle and dangerous for cyclists to ride, in the aim of saving sort of 10 grams here and 20 grams there. But yeah, they will be the ones, they're sort of the referees, they manage the world of cycling. A velodrome is the full name for a track. So people talking about riding the track, they'll be talking about riding around a velodrome. They're the same thing. A wetsuit, also known as a wettie in some parts of the world, is a full neoprene suit that you'll wear. Now, a wetsuit will allow water in. That's part of how it works. Water gets into the wetsuit, it gets trapped against the body, and that then heats up to sort of roughly around body temperature, and that's how you stay warm, because you're swimming along in a nice little sort of bubble of warm water, whereas obviously your hands, face and feet are going to be exposed to the water, but they are not dry suits. They're not going to keep the water out. They are going to let some water in, but assuming that wetsuit fits correctly, that water will then warm up. To wipe out is to crash your bike, normally in a relatively spectacular fashion. So if somebody said, I really wiped out in that corner, then it's not just a little spill, they really went down hard. A weight weenie is someone who will go to great expense and great lengths to get themselves the lightest bike possible. And these people, they can be slightly infuriating because they do tend to miss the big picture for obsessing over saving, 3 grams here by switching to titanium bolts and, these things like that. But yeah, a weight weenie is somebody who obsesses over the weight of their bike. A wheel sucker is a derogatory term for somebody who's always riding on somebody's wheel and never does a turn at the front. If somebody is strong enough to do a turn at the front, they probably should. But if somebody they've never ridden this far before, or they're really struggling on this ride, then there's nothing wrong with being able to sit in somebody's wheels. You just need to communicate, what's happening. The World Tour is the highest level of cycling. So there's a men's World Tour and there's a women's World Tour, and highest level of road cycling, I should say. And this incorporates races like the Tour de France and all of these other sort of major cycling events around the world throughout the year. On to Z now. We've got zones. Now, zones are sort of intensity brackets that we will create. We can either use heart rate or pace or power, and we'll split somebody's if we're looking at heart rate zones, we may say, okay, anything up to 120 beats per minute is your zone 1, and then 121 to 132 could be your zone 2. I'm just putting numbers out the air here, but we'll come up with brackets and we go zone 1 is recovery, zone 2 is endurance, zone 3 is tempo, zone 4 is threshold, zone 5 is sort of VO2 max and above. Just one example of a zone system there, but it allows us to set training and to review training and go, oh, you spent a lot of time in this zone, or you haven't spent enough time here. Want to focus on being in this zone in this workout. It really does help us, set some boundaries which are generally aligned with energy systems. To help ensure that we are getting the right kind of training in by riding, swimming and cycling in the right zones for us at any given time. And then finally we have Zwift. Now Zwift is a piece of indoor training software. It was the first major one that was released, well over 10 years ago now. And it is the most popular. I believe it's also the best, but it has become synonymous with indoor riding. So people say, oh, I'm Zwifting this weekend, which would mean I'm riding indoors on the Turbo Trainer. Finally, I wanted to cover numbers. Now, if we are swimming and people start throwing numbers around, they are going to be talking about distance. So they're going to be talking about, 200s or 150s or 25s. This is the distance that they're going to be swimming that interval for. You have to use the length of the pool to calculate that. Most pools are 25 metres as a point of reference. With cycling, as ever, it's a bit more complex. So if the number is between sort of 19 and 50 and it's just used in isolation, generally speaking, it's going to be referring to tyre width. So if somebody says, oh, I'm running 28s, chances are they're going to be running 28mm tyres, or I'm running 32s or 19s, and that's going to be referring to the tyre they are running. If a number has T at the end of it, that is going to be referring to the number of teeth on a cassette or on the chainring. So if they go, I've got a 32T, that means they're going to be talking about a 32 teeth chainring or cassette. And finally, if there are sort of two numbers closely followed by another, so somebody could go, I've got an 1132 or I've got a 1228. They're referring often to a cassette. So they'll be referring to the smallest cog, so 11 most often these days. That would be 11 until 2, say like a 32. So your smallest cog will have 11 teeth on it, your largest cog will have 32, and that is how we are describing that cassette. And that wraps up Triathlon Jargon. Now there are various bits that I realised that I have forgotten to add. I had ideas as going through for bits that I didn't cover, but I've come up with so many that I've added them to the blog post that there's a link to in the show notes. You can go and have a look there, because this episode is already 1 hour and 7 minutes. It doesn't need to be any longer, really. I hope you found that useful. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please give me a rating, or even write me a review if you're feeling very generous in Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever else it is you get this podcast. Help get it to more people so I can start putting more into the podcast and everybody wins. Drop me an email if you're interested in getting a quote for the coach training plans that I mentioned at the start of the episode. I will be launching them en masse in the next kind of few weeks, but if you are there and going, that is exactly what I need in my training, drop me an email and we'll see if we can get you set up ahead of that. Thank you once again for your company this week. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all very soon.